Construction that was way better because some things needed to be deconstructed. The philosophy professor said that worldviews are like boats. I looked down in my boat and I found that there was water in it. Three things that this metaphor helped me to clarify that kind of brought me back. Starting in college, I had some experiences and learned some things that one by one started to deconstruct and pick apart the faith that I had been taught, the things I thought about God, the version of Christianity that I grew up with. And in this deconstruction period, I found myself questioning everything and wondering if I should still keep going, believing the things that I've believed. And I want to tell you why I am still a Christian, why I still believe in God, why I still believe in Jesus, even after going through a process of deconstructing. After the deconstruction, there was a reconstruction that was way better because some things needed to be deconstructed, but there were thoughts and patterns that needed to be addressed in the process. And to sort of unpack the things that needed to be dealt with, I need to tell you some of the causes of my deconstruction. There were intellectual causes, there were emotional causes, and there were even relational causes. The intellectual causes, just to list a couple, the slaughtering of the Amalekites or certain groups of people among the Canaanites, it seems like God condones or maybe even commands in some cases that these things be done. And even the version of what I was taught about the Bible was that it's this perfect book that was essentially handed down to us, and there's no errors and there's nothing that has ever changed about this thing. But then you learn that some of our copies of the biblical manuscripts are missing certain verses, or there are certain edits, or there's grammatical errors. And so some of these things began to intellectually pick apart the version of Christianity that I was handed. Emotionally, I found that God was distant, or at least God felt far from me. And I didn't know why. Like other people, I would look around in chapel at this Christian school and be like, why are other people having these experiences with God? And I feel like I'm majoring in biblical studies, for goodness sake. And I'm going to chapel on the regular, and I'm reading my Bible, I'm doing all these other things. Why do I not have the same experiences that other people are having? I go on mission trips, I do all the stuff. Shouldn't I be having these same feelings? God, why are you far from me? And the other thing was some of the relational stuff, right? You get to know some people, and then you learn that the Buddhist next door is actually pretty cool and has some decent ideas. And then you follow politics enough, and there's lots of people who use the name Jesus and call themselves Christians that have some pretty messed up ideas. And so what do I do with that relationally? Now, I can't give you the whole long version of the story in a video like this. Maybe I can give you a longer version of the story. I can't give you each little thing that chipped away at my faith and each little moment that rebuilt it. But what I can do is I can share with you a metaphor that provided me with some clarity and gave me a path forward even after things had been picked apart and torn apart, on a way of rebuilding and returning to faith in a way that was meaningful, that still honored some of the questions and the things that were brought up in that difficult time period. The metaphor comes from my friend Jordan. She actually got it from her philosophy class. And the philosophy professor said that worldviews are like boats. And when I think about Christianity as a worldview, floating on the waters of life, right? We all need to have a boat in order to be afloat in this life, a worldview that answers questions about what we believe we are as humans, about how we got there, where we're going, all of these big questions in life. Worldviews provide a way to float on the waters of life and make sense of those questions. The thing is, in Christianity, as I started having those intellectual and emotional and relational questions, I looked down in my boat and I found that there was water in it. Seems like there's holes in this boat of mine. Is this the best boat that I can be in right now? Because if this boat has holes in it, I probably should go find a different boat. And that exact line of thinking is the very thing that helped me in my reconstruction process. Now, it kind of seems bad, right? Because I'm pointing out holes or water that's coming into the bottom of the boat. But what I learned along the way is that there are actually three things that this metaphor helped me to clarify about belief in God and Christianity that kind of brought me back. And so here's the first one. Other boats have holes too. See, when I started to see my own holes in this boat, you start to do kind of the version of like the grass is always greener on the other side. And so, yeah, I flirted and looked at other perspectives like, okay, what does the atheists say about how we got here and how we ought to live and how this all makes sense? And what does the Buddhist say? And what does the Sufi mystic say? Right? I started shopping around looking at other boats and how much sense those boats could actually make. And at first glance, when you get into a new scenario, a lot of times it's easy to romanticize. It's easy to be like, wow, yeah, these atheists, they really care about science. Or this Buddhist, they really seem to have a sense of inner peace. Or these Sufi mystics, they're able to embrace the mystery and embrace the divine. But then what happens after you spend long enough in another boat is you realize, oh no, there's really big holes in this boat as well. When you go around looking at other boats, you recognize that there are huge gaping holes in other boats. And it made me realize, okay, the Christian boat that I was floating in, it definitely had some quirks, definitely had some water in the bottom of it, but the holes were not as big as the other boats. And there's going to be some people who are like, okay, well, that's why there are no boats. Boats are a construct. No, even the container of saying that all religions are false or there is no objective truth, that is its own version of a boat, right? It's just a relativistic boat that doesn't have a bottom to it. And so all boats have holes in them in one way or another. And I found that Christianity's boat had less holes in it. I'm still going to acknowledge the holes, just seem to have less. And here's the kicker. In other boats, the vast majority of them, you're not allowed to ask about the holes. See, interestingly enough, a lot of my doubts and questions came at a Christian university studying biblical studies from other people who were Christians because they were willing to ask hard questions and pursue truth. In some other contexts, in some other religions, you are not allowed to ask those types of questions. If you ask those types of questions, it's disrespectful, it's dishonoring, it's a sin to even ask those types of questions. You just need to shut your mouth and believe. But Christianity is a boat that tolerates the questions and allows you to ask them. And so, yes, the boats have holes, but I found that the Christian boat has less holes in it and had better answers for the things we observe in life, had better answers for some of the logic stuff that I was struggling with, had even reasonable answers to some of the doubts that I brought up intellectually in the beginning. And if all boats have holes in them, it made me realize that I don't think there's ever going to come a time where we have 100% certainty about anything. Rene Descartes, that's why his famous thought experiment occurred. He's like, the whole I think, therefore I am statement comes from, we could doubt everything. We can't have 100% certainty that we're not plugged into the matrix right now. We can't have 100% certainty. His version was that there's a demon in his brain making him imagine all of this reality. There's no way we could be certain of all of that, but what we can do is we can infer to the best explanation, which is a fancier way of saying, find the boat with the least amount of holes. If it's more plausibly true than its negation, if it's more probably true than all of the other alternatives, that's the boat you got to get into. So looking at other boats was really helpful to me. But one of the things I also had to do through things like therapy and mentorship and reading and my own process of finding healing and working through some of my own issues, one of the things I realized is that some of the water in the bottom of my boat was put there by me. There were a lot of behaviors and a lot of personality quirks and a lot of baggage that I carried around that was the equivalent of me taking buckets of water and dumping it in the boat. And then I would look at the water in the bottom of the boat and say, why is there water in the boat? Oh my gosh, it's a bad boat. The problem is that I became really good at scooping up water and dumping it in the boat and blaming it on the boat. But once I started to do the work, I realized that maybe the reason God feels so distant is because I looked at my own relationships, my own style of relating with people, my own emotional capacity for things, and I realized, wait a second, I'm kind of distant from everybody. My way of interacting with people does tend to hold them at arm's distance. My way of connecting with people does seem like there's a disconnect in a lot of ways. And so strange that when it comes to God, I was quick to blame God for that disconnect. But in all of the other facets of my life, I'm like, well, this is how I do relationships. So that needs to change, right? I'm dumping relationship water into the boat, being like, God, why are you so distant? Not realizing that I'm the one who's distant. And once I started to work through, okay, well, how do I unlock certain parts of my heart? How do I deal with certain types of emotions? How do I process through those types of things? The more I processed through that, the more I found that I was able to experience things with God as well. By doing the work that fixes all relationships for me, it turned out that that was important for me fixing my relationship with God. For the people who were in chapel raising their having experiences with God, I was wondering why I'm not like that, but maybe it was because I never tried raising my hands. Maybe it was because I never tried being an expressive person. And if you're not an expressive person, well, then you're probably not going to have moments of connected expressiveness with God either. Once I started to invest energy in that type of relating, I started to see dividends on that type of relating with God as well. I stopped scooping buckets of water and dumping them in my own boat. Instead, I started doing it the other way, and some of those experiences started turning around and happening for me because I started to fix some of the stuff that was going on inside of me. So other boats have holes in them. I was dumping water into my own boat. And the third thing that I realized through this metaphor is that maybe the holes are there on purpose. I know that seems strange, but I went whitewater rafting this summer with some friends. And when you're whitewater rafting, the boat, at least all the boats that I've ever been in when I go whitewater rafting, have holes near your feet. There are these inflated edges, and there's some inflated things in the middle that provide structure to the boat. But down on the bottom floor, there are these holes, so that as you're wedging your feet in there to make sure that you don't pop out of the boat when you hit a rock or whatever, your feet are soaked the whole time because there's water in the bottom of the boat. This water that comes in, those holes in the bottom of the boat, are part of what's called a self-bailing system. It lets water in, but also when there's a huge wave that comes over the boat, it lets water out as well so that the boat doesn't sink. Maybe Christianity's holes, maybe those things that really bothered me, maybe the things that I looked down and was like, why is there water in this boat? What's the problem here? Maybe that's actually how the boat was designed. Because when we look at our sacred text, the Bible, when you look in the Bible, you actually see some acknowledgement of holes. If you read through the book of Job, the whole book is an argument. It's questions, and like the part of Job that always gets quoted is like the little story in chapter 1 and 2 and the conclusion of the story at the end. But the other 30-something chapters of the book of Job is debate between 4 guys and then 1 extra guy, and then God joins in the debate. God asks a ton of questions after the fact as well, adding fodder to the discussion about how things operate in this universe. See, God invites the conversation. God invites the questions. At the end, after Job had said, I did nothing wrong, I don't know why God is doing this, after saying all sorts of crazy things that sometimes were even accusatory and struggling, God says, Job spoke rightly about me. After the resurrection of Jesus, in the book of Matthew, it tells us that while the disciples were waiting for Jesus to speak to them, right, that there had been some reports that Jesus had resurrected, and there was a lot of people who followed Jesus. And it said that among the disciples, some doubted. Now, it's interesting. We have the famous story of doubting Thomas, but in addition to that, to know that this early community of believers, the very seeds of this new Christian thing that was getting started, before the ascension of Jesus, while Jesus is still making appearances post-resurrection, part of the community has doubts. And what I think is beautiful is that those people weren't kicked out of the community. That from the get-go, Christianity has been the type of thing that can allow people who have doubts to still be part of us, to still be part of the community. Yeah, you have your doubts. Well, like, wait till Jesus shows up. And when he sees them, then maybe your doubts will be alleviated. But you can stick around. We're not going to kick you out and say that you have to go to hell. We're going to say that you can be part of our community because it's in this community that you'll probably experience God and you'll find Jesus. Or in the book of Acts, well, the church is still trying to figure things out about, like, what does all this mean? We were Jews, but now we're Christians. And so how much of the Jewish stuff do we need to practice? They had to make some decisions about things like circumcision, and what things to eat or not eat, and how to observe the Sabbath. And they had to come to some decisions. And I love the verbiage when they send the letter out to the churches, is they say, it seemed good to us in the Holy Spirit that these are the things we're going to do now. See, even in that acknowledgement, it's not, we received an official decree from the Lord that you are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols. No, it was like, we talked about it, and it seems like this is the direction the Holy Spirit is leading us. See, built into Christianity, there's room for doubt. There's room for questions. There's room for bringing those questions to God. Just read through the book of Psalms. Like 40% of the thing is laments, where people are saying, God, where are you? Built into Christianity is an invitation to say, ask some questions, engage in the debate, be part of the discussion. Because I think that's the very thing that allows not just some of the water to pool in the bottom of the boat, but it's also the very thing that allows the water to run out when the waves come over the boat. See, Christianity, yeah, there are some holes there, but maybe the holes there are on purpose so that we can still stay afloat in these waters, even when the seas get rough. Your feet are going to get wet, but it's still the best way to survive the waters. So if you're actively deconstructing right now, I would say the good news is that God is real. I do believe God is real. I think that is more plausibly true than its negation, that God is real, and I trust that to be true. And if he is real, then there's no amount of questioning that can make him not real. There's no amount of doubt that can make him not real. So keep asking questions, provided that your questions are asked with humility and a sincere desire for truth. Sometimes we ask questions, sometimes we throw out doubts because we have emotional hurt and we want to attack a thing. But if you are sincerely asking questions, looking for answers, digging for truth, at the end of a search for truth, you will find God, because God is real. And not only is God real, but God is not afraid of your questions. And so in the process of maybe some of the deconstruction, instead of just like going straight to Reddit and trying to look for answers there, maybe also ask some of those questions to God himself. That's what we see in the Bible, is that when people have doubts and issues and beef with God, they take it directly to God and say, God, why are you doing this thing? God, what is the deal with this? What is the deal with that? And what I found is in the conversation with God, in bringing him the questions, I find that maybe we don't always get the answers we want, but we do find things different than when we go to other people for the answers. And so my prayer for you is that you keep seeking truth. You keep on this journey towards truth. Because if God is true, then that journey will lead you straight to him. Keep at it. And you're always welcome here in the boat.